The further I traveled away from the land, the kind of unhappier I became. I'd created a really beautiful life. I had a really amazing girlfriend, the best paid job that I'd ever had, and I was experiencing depression really severely for the first time in my life. Depression is just anger without enthusiasm. Actually, the anger had just been suppressed so deeply that it had lost all its flavor of movement and it just become stagnant. I made one change when I was 30 years old. That was just to change the main decision-making tool from my mind into my body. We have rhythms and we can't go at a single pace all year round. We're going to burn out. There are physical experiences of the natural world happening within our bodies. It might be spring outside, but it might not be spring for you, and that's also okay. Qigong is a movement practice from ancient China. I went to a session and I immediately had a calling to teach it.
Do I have to believe in energy in order to do Qigong? Welcome to The Unfolding. I'm Olivier and I'm really grateful you're choosing to spend some time with me. My intention is to explore topics about connection, meaning, and staying human in this digital age. If what you hear feels nourishing, you're welcome to subscribe, like, or follow. It's a simple way of supporting my work and helping it reach others. Thank you. Simon, you grew up on a farm. How did that shape you?
I think I understand now that the farm was always there in me, really, and much of my life was a movement away from the land, really. Like I kind of went to school and off to university into these cities, and actually the further I traveled away from the land, the kind of unhappier I became, until I reached a point in my late 20s, really, where I'd come not just from the farm, but actually from land itself, come really disconnected in a city and in myself, and was super unhappy. And my journey from that point, the last 6 or 7 years, has all been actually in the direction of going back to it. And yeah, I guess I understood that the freedom I felt as a kid, being able to run around the farm and just explore and make dens in the woods and climb trees and yeah, take whatever emotions you have to the season, to the land, to the place, take your friends, explore, was really me at my kind of happiest, freest self. And so much of my journey in the last few years has been how I can reconnect with that version of myself, but also physically with the land. So yeah, I certainly have been shaped by it in a different way, probably to a lot of my friends who I grew up with, who kind of remain as farmers now, never really left the valley that we grew up in. I always wanted to kind of leave. And they used to tease me that I was kind of a farmer who would wear white trainers in the fields and kind of nice jeans. And yeah, was a bit of an urban farmer. But now I understand that it never leaves you, really, and still shapes me.
What do you think you wanted to leave instead of your friends?
I think a lot of it was quite unconscious, really. Like I went to a all boys boarding school, so that decision was kind of made for me by my parents, but also my older brother was at the school, so I felt like I wanted to go there. But I found boarding it tremendously difficult, at least at first, before you kind of adapt. So it wasn't necessarily fully intentional that I left. And then after that, it was just like, I guess, a middle class kind of tide from where I was from, that you just went on to university and into London. So a lot of it without like deep thought. It wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to get away. It just was what was done. And so it probably wasn't until, as I say, in my late 20s, early 30s, where I really started having more conscious thought and being like, actually, what do I want? I kind of woke up almost into my life in my late 20s. Yeah, and so that was what traveled me away from that place. A kind of patterning, I guess, of lots of people of my time and of for many people, generations before, were just following the same footpath, and then starting to at some point realize that that wasn't for me.
I'm curious what made the shift.
I studied actually anthropology, and which again I chanced upon, and I look back on decisions like that and wonder if there was like a kind of higher power guiding some of those decisions, because it wasn't again conscious thought, but actually anthropology was like, one, insanely interesting to study, and two, actually so aligned with what I want to understand now of like our connection to place, our connection to culture, to ritual, to patterns, to religion, to one another, to finding commonality between different beings, to interrelationship to all other living beings. All of this was encompassed in a degree, but I absolutely didn't know what I was signing up for. I just didn't want to study what I was studying at school anymore. And so actually those years studying anthropology were fascinating, and in many ways I wish I'd continued to follow that thread. But throughout my 20s I worked in the sport industry, again without a huge amount of creative thought. I just stumbled into lots of these things, like the pattern of lots of my life. I really up until my 30th birthday, where you just kind of are being moved by the tide and the river of life, and you think you're making decisions, but really you're not. You're kind of, I think, probably just gently suppressing desires and instincts. And at some point I got to a point at the end of my 20s where I'd created a really beautiful life. Like I had a really amazing girlfriend, a flat in Amsterdam, the kind of best paid job that I'd ever had at a kind of big corporate where I was speech writing for execs. So, and a little boat, we went on the canals, all the things. And I was experiencing depression really severely for the first time in my life. So I was like, oh, this is so strange, because I ticked all of the things that I've been told to explore, and I was deeply unhappy. And that was the moment where I realized things had to change for me.
Was there something specific that made you realize that you needed to change?
There wasn't a single specific event per se. I think there was accumulation of things in my life that, like pressures within my family, pressures within the relationship, because there was a lot of emphasis on, particularly around marriage at that point. A lot of people were kind of committing to a person, and I didn't even feel like I knew who I was. And I think I made a lot of decisions where I was just trying to move away from that. So I moved to the Netherlands. I changed jobs. I was trying to change the settings in the hope that that would change the feelings I was experiencing. And yeah, we actually had then, as a couple, had an unplanned pregnancy, and that really was the moment that woke me up, because suddenly I realized that if you didn't take like courageous and decisions in alignment with like what your intuition was saying, like life was going to happen to you. And we had a miscarriage during the term, and I think that was the moment where someone from beyond was giving me a whack and saying, hey Simon, you need to start speaking your truth. And it was still a difficult road to learning to do that, but from that point I kind of understood that however much it might upset another, or upset your parents, or upset the kind of apple cart of what you're meant to be doing, it was essential that you spoke that truth.
What was the truth?
That I needed to spend time outside of that relationship. I think I'd known for a little while, and I just didn't have the courage to speak. I was having to say that to the most important person in my life, that actually and they were kind of, I guess, the only way I could regulate my nervous system, the support I had, the sounding board. And suddenly you were being told you have to take that person away, and I knew that, but I just couldn't face up to that reality, because I hadn't developed any of the skills of relationship to self, that was going to take a long time afterwards. But the initial, I think, truth was that, and it required going on a really intense personal development retreat in Italy to like learn this process. Yeah, and from there it began to change slowly, but it began to change.
So what happened then?
Well, then I went on a thing called the Path of Love. Have you heard of the Path of Love, Olivia?
No.
I remember we were moving back from the Netherlands to the UK, and all of this was kind of emerging in my life, and kind of a bit of a storm gathering. And I'd run out of road, I'd run to the Netherlands. Now we were coming back. I was doing anything to avoid confronting some of the things in my life. And I found just online a thing called the Path of Love. And again, whether it's that slightly higher power part of yourself that just gives you a nudge and says yes. And I had a phone call with one of the leaders of the workshop, and he was like, Simon, we're all a 5-floor house. And he said, I'm not interested in the 5th or the 4th or the 3rd floor, even the 2nd or the 1st. He said, we're going to have to go down into the cellar and see what exists there. And you're only able to come if we're able to go there. And at that point, I'd done my first 6 months of therapy and still hadn't learned to speak my truth. I couldn't even utter it in a completely confidential, private space. And it was by going on this retreat where we do 7 days in silence, group therapy, like a lot of intense kind of meditation, dance, like practices that now I'm quite well versed in and love. But at that point, I had no idea about. So I really, I dived in at the deep end. But it showed me what radical honesty was, what like true like compassion was, what the courage to clean up your life was, all of the things that now I see are vital to a life well lived. But it was like a crash course, and from that point I began to pick up the skills.
This one self-development course really switched something within you, and then you were able to find a new path?
There was definitely a time before and a time after, and I think that was the catalyst that shifted it, because it introduced me to somatic practice, which I'd never really done before. I was a head on a stick, really, like I was completely disconnected from my body.
For people who don't know what somatic practice is, can you share a few words?
Yeah, sure. I guess again, even the language. I think often about the language and how we can make things more accessible. But that phrase, yeah, really means like wisdom of the body. My body was like giving me direction, and I was ignoring it, and eventually it started shouting at me, and it shouted in the form of depression, because to me that's like the ultimate signpost that says, hey, like the kind of climate of your life is just not aligned to who you are. And eventually it had to scream. And at that point I was, probably like breaking down with emotion several times in a week, and was just completely disconnected, but hadn't had the tools. And on this retreat we started just to engage in practices like different forms of meditation, of dance. We had the day that really shifted it really was the second day was focused on anger. And at that point I felt no anger. All I felt was sadness. We would sit in groups in horseshoes. And again, it was, so you'd have 12 people in your group who were part of the retreat, and then 2 facilitators who were trained psychotherapists through the program, and then the same number of people who had been through the retreat before and were volunteers. So suddenly you had about 25, 26 sets of eyes on you, and it was the most naked and most seen I've ever been, because as I say, I hadn't even been able to tell the truth to one therapist, and you're standing there and you're being like seen, maybe on a depth that, well, certainly on a depth that I'd never experienced before. And the facilitator Rupta said, I said, I'm not angry, I'm just really sad. And she said a line from Osho, which is that depression is just anger without enthusiasm. And I never really thought of that actually the anger had just been suppressed so deeply that it had lost all its flavor of movement, and it had just become stagnant. And that stagnation was sadness. And we began to just stir it, and I just started to unpick anger. And it was the most liberating, like exciting, kind of a bit scary, but mainly exciting feeling, because suddenly the depression had some action in it, and that just felt insanely relieving, that I was like, oh, I can take action. And the anger, when it's directed in a kind of in a healthy way, is incredibly powerful. And we would do these burn meditations where they would take you on a kind of 60-90 minute journey through music, where everyone would kind of be working with pillows. You'd have your space and you just move intuitively to the music, and they would arc it obviously to reach like a crescendo and then to kind of drop down. And you'd start, as it kind of built up, you'd start using the pillows. People would be screaming, there'd be banging, and it's quite a challenging environment in terms of getting used to that level of expression. But at some point you just become lost in the process, and the idea is that you then burn these emotions, you let that anger move through your body, to then have more skill to be able to say, hey, Olivier, I was really upset, I was really angry with the way that made me feel, but the emotion isn't there, so I'm not going to be causing you to shut down or back away. I've kind of burnt the emotion, and I'm able to then just speak more calmly about it. And that process has been really important for me, because I think, have I accessed my anger recently? And they meet the kind of graduates of the Path of Love once a month in London, and as long as if I'm able to be there, I'll always be there, because I think, oh, I'm more angry than I know. Like, actually, it's in my jaw, it's in my hips. I just haven't really felt it. I think often it comes out for people behind the steering wheel, they're driving the car and suddenly. So I feel like it's there, and I sometimes just need an encouragement to access it.
You really had a challenge to fully be in touch with some emotions, and especially anger was one that you had repressed.
Mm. Yeah. Well, what's your relationship with anger, Olivia? Yeah.
My relationship with anger, I'm learning to feel anger in my body and to welcome it when it comes, and not necessarily act from the anger, but when it arises, really welcome it, and being able to name it is something that I've been working on, and it's been powerful for me because I had learned to repress my anger. So I was guessing that there might be some of that for you as well. Both anger and sadness were not really acceptable in my household growing up. So I've pushed down both of them. Anger was even less accepted. Therefore, it piled up a lot inside me, and I had so much of it. And now it comes up quite easily at any opportunity, because there's been so much that has been there lingering to be expressed and seen. And so I dedicate myself to find places where I can welcome my anger. And when I name it as well, somehow, without acting from it, it gives me power, and I can surf the energy that the anger is giving me without being a slave to it. That's kind of where I am with it. Does that resonate with some of your experience?
Yeah, that feels like great skill, but I think it's not as readily available for me. Like, it's interesting, even just talking about it now, and I can just feel it in my jaw. It's really interesting, because for me, I have to dig quite deep to find it, and I need to remember to do that, because it's so like powerful when I do. Like, those appointments where I'll go to a burn meditation, and I'll have to almost like be coaxing myself, almost like tempting the anger to emerge by starting to access it, by starting to vent, and then it will be released, and it will start to come through. And I think, yeah, my patterns have been to kind of push it down. Like one of my less skillful communication tools in a romantic relationship would be sulking. or potentially with my family. Wherever I'm like really safe enough, like I would sulk. And um, I think that's a form of anger and frustration as well that's being suppressed in some way. And yeah.
Because English not being my first language, what does that mean, soaking?
Sulking is kind of yeah, like sulking is where um I would not tell you what I'm feeling, which might be quite British as well, where I would be clearly showing that I'm unhappy, you know, and I've pushed an emotion down, and I might even say, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. But clearly, I'm wanting you to guess what is upset with me, and it's super unskillful because as soon as I name those things, or if I am with someone who's understanding of that and able to like help coax it out of me, it relieves it. But my inclination would be to sulk. I remember as a young boy of, you know, under 10, like I was quite fussy with my food, and my mum would tell me, for instance, that I couldn't leave the table till I'd finished a certain amount of whatever it was. I think I was eating Shreddies, you know, the cereal, and and I sat with it in my mouth for what felt like, you know, an eternity, certainly at that age, because time has different parameters, but a really long time. And so I have a trait within me that I'm told is a Taurus trait of being quite stubborn, and sulking to me is a bit of a form of that. That would be a form of sulking where I've kind of taken something on. And even at that young age, I would stubbornly sit with the cereal in my mouth. And it comes up, as I say, predominantly in romantic relationships, occasionally with my family still. But I'm trying to, yeah, I would like to unpick that one, because really like the ability, because as soon as I share, as soon as we're able to find the words to meet it, then it tends to dissipate.
Yeah, what I understand of relationships is that the same pathways that were used within our primary relationships within our family are the ones that are being used in our new primary relationships. And so it makes sense to me that it would come up in this kind of ways. And I can definitely some of that in myself as well.
Yeah. Sit with my granola in my mouth for an hour and let them know.
When you started to follow more the wisdom of the body, which I imagine you were quite disconnected from your body, like most people, in my understanding, are in our society. What came out of that?
A lot changed. I say when I go into corporates and give it, I go into corporations and give a session, which will be kind of like a well-being workshop, and we'll use breath work and we'll use movement. The movement practice I teach is called Qigong, to introduce them to tools for kind of regulating your nervous system, releasing stress, maybe energizing if you're feeling a bit flat. We'll play around with different pieces. And I say in those sessions that I made one change when I was about 30 years old. So right around my Saturn's return, but that time we've chatted about. And that was just to change the main decision-making tool from my mind into my body. So I started trying to make decisions based on what my body was guiding me towards, because particularly at that point where I was really dysregulated. So I would swing from kind of states of like quite like manic euphoria, excitement, like buzzing energy, to kind of quite dramatically emotionally like low. And it was super hard within that swing to know where to make a decision from. And as I started to like be introduced to different tools, I started to find a kind of point that felt like somewhere closer to my intuitive kind of wiser self. Initially that came through breath work. So I started in one of the COVID lockdowns with my therapist from the Path of Love. They were also a trained breathwork facilitator, and we started doing conscious connected breathwork. Because particularly at that point in lockdown, life, spoken therapy I found was kind of looping itself because there was only so much of life unfolding. And so we started guiding breathwork in our sessions, and I had these really euphoric, fascinating, points of clarity. And they felt particularly stark at that point because I hadn't really met anything like that within myself. And yeah, it began a path of getting curious, of moving through breathwork, training in different modalities in breathwork, in mindfulness, and then kind of moving towards Qigong and connection with the natural world really now being my main focuses. But yeah, I guess I found that point that felt truer to me, and from there I could make decisions, and I could take kind of right actions or right.
You did the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, is that it?
That is, yeah.
What is it exactly, and what did you do there?
I'm actually about to go back as well in the beginning of May, just for 2 weeks to walk another Camino route. But yeah, the Camino de Santiago, there are I think 17 old pilgrim routes that convene on this city in northwest Spain, Santiago de Compostela. And yeah, pilgrims from particularly across Europe for thousands, hundreds into the thousands of years have walked these routes to this city. And I guess I've been drawn by pilgrimage as a practice for a while. Like I kind of would turn to walking as a way, as lots of people do, as a way for kind of clarifying again and thinking and exploring and connecting to what's under your feet. And then to do that on land and on routes where people have been doing it for hundreds of years just has this deeper symbolism that you really feel as you walk. And the Caminos in particular are special. They've become incredibly popular in recent years, kind of pointing, I guess, to a wider societal yearning for connection to spirit and to place. And yeah, now I think about 500,000 pilgrims a year walk across these 17 kind of routes that run like veins through, and they all converge in this kind of the heart in Santiago. And it's just an incredibly freeing practice if you have the time to make a bit of space for it, because to walk west for a period of time with very little to concern you aside from where you're going to sleep and who you might share some tapas with in the evening is just incredibly freeing. And I went in the summer of 2022 when there was still a lot of complexity, and particularly my personal life, a lot of drama and dysregulation, and all of it just melted away within a couple of days of walking along the Camino Frances, which is the French way, the original Camino route, the way of St. James, who is the pilgrim after which it's named. As I arrived on the edge of Santiago de Compostela, you can actually see the kind of towers of the cathedral for the first time, and you've been walking for a month up to that point. I saw a little sign, like a handwritten sign that said, "Do you have one more question?" with an arrow pointing to the left. And I thought, yeah, I've got a lot more questions still. So I followed it down to a van, and there was a big white van, and in the window was Antoine, who at that time was 80 years old, and is a Dutchman, and age 50, so 30 years before, he was living in The Hague. He had a really well-paid job, a boat. He had 2 children, his wife, kind of the Dutch, like, poster dream life. And his wife left him for one of his good friends. And he said he's immensely grateful to both his friend and his wife, because that was the moment that sent him into a bit of a spiral. And he went to visit his mum in Spain. And from that point, spent the next 30 years kind of on the road, per se. He returns to the Netherlands a bit to see his children, but in the main, he's been a wanderer, and he's become an amazing teacher, to my experience at least. He is a Reiki master. He spent many years in India. He's kind of been roving, sharing practices, sharing wisdom. And for a few years before that, he's been pitched at the end of the Camino de Santiago, the French one, which is probably the most popular route. And he said, interestingly, as you walk on the Camino, the phrase that everyone shares with each other, between pilgrims, in the villages, in the restaurants, in the albergues where you stay, everyone says "Buen camino," good journey, good journey. And it's a reminder that this journey, but also life, is about enjoying the route along the way, because the cathedral at the end of it is a great cathedral, but it isn't anything, you know, different to maybe what you're going to see anywhere else. Really, the experience of it is that pilgrimage towards it. But he said is that people come to the edge of Santiago and they see the towers for the first time, they start to forget Buen Camino and they start running a bit quicker. And he said, on average, about one pilgrim stops a day, and he between 500 and 1,000 will walk past his van. So that day it was me, and he came out of the van and we sat together, and we sat for more than an hour. And yeah, he had that kind of depth of soul that you just felt like he'd already met you in some way. And yeah, and I asked him a lot more than one question, and I still remember that meeting. And there were one or two people along the way, one friend that I made, and Antoine, who I realized that was why I'd gone on the pilgrimage for. And yeah, I spoke to him. He reckoned it was my last life, which has really stayed with me, because one thing I really experienced is quite deep paralysis around decisions in particular, even now when I'm trying to make big decisions, particularly the ones that bring a form of kind of commitment into my life. Like it can feel really hard. And he said he believed it was my last life, and that was perhaps why the weight of those decisions felt so huge. And yeah, it really resonated with me, that feeling. We spoke about my sister Sophie. So I had a sister who died before I was born. She died when she was 10 weeks old, and I was conceived 9 months after she died. And increasingly, I've felt immensely close to her, particularly along that way. And yeah, and we spoke about how I had a kind of opportunity to live, I guess, for her, and the permission to do that, and the encouragement actually for her to want that. Yeah, and I asked him also what my calling was, my purpose was, and he was really clear. Even before I was just beginning the process of moving towards facilitation and creating spaces, and he said, your calling is to be a teacher. Which is interesting because I come from lots of teachers. My mum was a teacher, my brother was a teacher. But this is a different form of teaching. And yeah, and he said by living in kind of a way of authenticity, and then by sharing and exploring and sharing practices that mean a lot to me, I could teach and guide others. And so all of those things, yeah, it means there's a conversation that stays with me.
So now you teach and guide others. What do you do exactly, and how do you teach?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It'd be interesting what your reflections are, Olivier, on that kind of what do you do? It's the easiest it's been to answer at this moment, but it has not been a quick, easy question to answer. And I think particularly of some of the like kind of family drinks parties where I go in the village, where everyone's very upstanding and like, and what do you do? And they just want it to be straight and clear. They want lawyer, they want maybe work in finance, they want something and for a long while I didn't have that, and it actually brought on a lot of shame, because I was exploring these means, but it wasn't making sense commercially. It wasn't making sense actually, even how it was making me feel. Like I was lonely, I was challenged by it, but something just kept me pursuing it, you know, that like that sense of alignment that Antoine like beautifully recognized for me, I think, was the thing that said, no, you're moving in the right direction, that the why and the what are correct, even if the how is not quite there yet. Just keep trusting. And yeah, and so there's just been this desire, I think, to continue on a path. And that, I guess the main thing I realized, going back to that first question, was that I grew up in a place that meant I was intimately connected with the land from a young age. And I kind of believed everyone had that opportunity. And as I've got older, I've realized that's an immense privilege. And actually that is absolutely essential for our well-being as humans, but also for the well-being of the planet, because you understand as you go deeper into connection with the land that there is no separation between you and everything around you. And of course, in that place, you begin to think about and care for the planet in a different way. And so I see my work as introducing people into relationship with their bodies. So how we can make that journey from our mind into our body, with one another. So offline gatherings where we spend time together, and then crucially in connection with the land, so that everyone feels like they belong to this land, that they feel like they know how to and are able to draw on the wisdom and guidance of the natural world. And I do that through working as facilitator. So I trained in breath work. I trained in a movement practice called Qigong, in nature connection. I've done a qualification in kind of coaching psychology, so quite interested in those kind of relationships as well. And yeah, now my work is all about bringing people more intimately into those spaces and into connection.
Is Qigong exactly?
Yeah, Qigong. Qigong is a movement practice from ancient China that I, to be honest, hadn't heard of. And it was love at first sight for me, which has not happened. It's actually not happened before in any of the practices. Like where I went to a session and I immediately had a calling to teach it. Like I looked and it was in a little woodland. I'm still friends with the teacher, Aaron. He's been a really helpful mentor for me and guide for me. And yeah, it was love at first sight. I think at that point I was teaching breathwork, so I trained a bit in breathwork. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was important, but it never truly felt like my calling to teach. I think it was a vehicle to guide me further into practices. And really, the breath underpins all body practices, so it's a great grounding to have. But particularly when I first trained in conscious breathwork, which is part of transformational breath, so where Wim Hof is from, and where quite a few holotropic breathing and different forms of more transformational breath, because I'd had such amazing personal results, I thought, I must want to teach that. And so I did a 6-month training, and I'd walk around these studios where I had everyone lying down, people having, quite amazing experiences. And I was out of my body. I was like, this is not me. Like I would zoom out and watch, and I was like, no, that's not my calling. And so I continued looking, and I practiced yoga for many years, but never had the nudge to call it. During one of the COVID lockdowns, I'd led fitness boot camps in the villages and really enjoyed making people move their bodies. Like I like to be able to make people laugh. I think one of the things I didn't love about breathwork was everyone turning deep within. Like I liked this form of connection, that we would be there and we'd be engaging, but together. And so I kept looking, and at one point I stumbled upon that woodland and upon that class with Qigong. And yeah, from there I wanted to go deeper into the practice. Qigong comes from ancient China, and it's part of the traditional Chinese medicine. Like that collection of within traditional Chinese medicine includes Chinese massage, acupuncture, herbology, and then movement practices of Kung Fu, Tai Chi, and Qigong. And all of them kind of work together with this idea that there's a more natural rhythm to being human. So they come out of the 5 elements, and they also have 5 seasons, because they include a 5th season of late summer, which sits between autumn and between summer and autumn, which I've actually always liked. It's quite a short period, but it has that distinction. You kind of had awareness of that. And yeah, Qigong as a practice arose, they say, between 5 and 8,000 years ago. And at that point, everyone was working on the land, and they would go out into the land for their days, and then they would come back together as communities in the evening around the fire. And often a lot of the work was in rice fields, so they were getting quite wet, and lots of illness and disease was building up. And so they were just looking at ways to stay warm and to stay well. And they began initially dancing around the fire together and just dancing their bodies. And they realized as they danced, they felt a bit better. They felt a bit more vitality, and they began to become aware of energy. And then they started, I like to think of them playfully, mimicking animals. And they started interpreting some of the animals' movements. And as they did that more and more, they started to realize that that kind of feeling of vitality they were getting, what now is named Qi, which means energy or life force. Yeah, they were getting a feeling for it for the first time. So they were like, oh, our Qi is beginning to move, our energy is shifting. And then Gong means work or skill. So they started to go, how can we actually do this more skillfully? How can we begin to shape and move our energy? So over many, 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 many years, they started turning these movements into established movements that they paired with breath, and then they also combine with their mind. So in Qigong, we use our movement, we use our breath, and we use our mind. They say where the mind goes, the Qi flows. So as we place our mind on a certain part of the body, they realized that it would start to generate movement of their energy. And yeah, like Qi in terms of a form has a very physical components to it. The fact that we're magnetic, that we have so much water in our body, that we have blood flow, digestion system, our breath, nerve endings, our lymphatic system, all of this comes together to create a physical experience of energy. And so on a physical level, as we move our bodies, as we use our breath, we're starting to encourage those systems to work more smoothly. So your blood's going to be flowing better, your breath's going to be going deeper and wider into your body, your digestion system's going to be beginning to work really healthily. And then there's a kind of more spiritual component where we have an awareness that actually as we move in these ways, we're connected to maybe something bigger than us. The traditional Chinese medicine, and particularly Qigong and the movements, are really closely connected with Taoism. So they were coming up at the same time that Taoism as a belief system was emerging as well. So again, that connection to seasonality. So they would say within traditional Chinese medicine, if you were eating foods with the seasons, if you were rising with the sun and sleeping with the moon, if you were following those natural cadences whilst doing your movement, whilst maybe doing some acupuncture, a bit of massage, you're going to be pretty well. But obviously the world in which we're living in, and the majority of us in the West have created, is a long, long way from that natural rhythm. So I guess within my work in London, I'm just trying to introduce people to some of that thinking and a little bit of what those practices feel like in the...
Do I have to believe in energy in order to do Qigong?
But certainly you wouldn't have to believe in anything outside of the physical experience. But, you know, on a really simple level, particularly when I go into a corporate and they're not going to want me talking about anything connected to anything outside of that room, no one would be in denial of the fact that we can generate what I'm calling energy. They could call it whatever they want. And I might do something as simple as getting them to rub their hands together really fast. And as they're rubbing their hands together, they'll begin to notice that there's a little bit of heat that's starting to generate under their hands as we rub faster, because we're creating a little bit of friction. And then I get them to just place that over their face, because their face is a really nice, just hover just off your face. So just a short distance from your face. And our faces are really sensitive. So even as we hold it there, we have an awareness that there is without us touching, there's an exchange between our hands and our face, because we've generated that heat. We've created what I'm calling chi or energy, but they could call it whatever they like. In the same way, if you were standing by a really busy road and a massive lorry going at its full rate goes past, you have a feeling that it comes past you, and you're like, wow, I had an awareness. Or if you're stood in a room with your back to the door and someone comes into the room who has any form of energy, but particularly if they have a slightly unsettling energy, you're going to know they're there before you even hear them. You'll just have an awareness that they've come into the space. So all of those things in the main are commonly accepted now. But I'm often having to create and deliver in a way that is for people who would want no belief beyond the room. And actually, I find that the best challenge. I'm like, when I go into a corporate and it's a brightly lit canteen, when they're stood there, they've maybe been nudged down by their boss or because they just want a break from their desk, but they have no inclination to come to the session, and they're staring at me flatly at the start of the session. And I think that's just a great challenge to see if I can introduce it in a way, because ultimately my feeling on a lot of wellness is why I even struggled saying I run a wellness business for a while, was that it was a bit of an echo chamber and it was really inaccessible. Like the language, the way people were engaging, even the levels of consciousness that we've touched upon is just really inaccessible. And I feel like the skill of a facilitator is, how do we take some of these amazing ancient practices and deliver it in a way that someone in my village pub back at home, who's not really left the valley too much, would be like, oh yeah, I get that. And that makes sense. And it's the reason I'm rebranding my business at the moment to Common Nature, because I want all of our work to be positioned for everyone every day. So how do we share these things in a way that feels like, oh yeah, that's for me? I think that's one of the skills, certainly of the facilitation I want to do.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the philosophy around the seasons?
Yeah. I think looking back, it was something that I just experienced as a child, both the physical experience of the seasons, because growing up on the farm, you spend a lot of time outdoors. The story of the seasons is all around you throughout the year. You're intimately close to it in a way that often you have to look a bit deeper in London, because actually you can move from your home to the tube to work to different kind of centrally heated rooms and brightly lit spaces, and on the farm you're closer, I guess. So that proximity meant I had a physical experience of the seasons at a young age. And I think I also understood that, not at the time but now looking back, that there was a replication of that within my body. So I could be feeling like a particular season, and I was able to bring whatever that was to the land, particularly the woods, where I would spend a lot of time. You could go out into the woods and you could dance under a tree and feel incredible energies of summer in the depths of winter when it's wet and dank. Or you could be there in summer and you could be grieving like autumn for something that you've lost in your life, as whatever it may be. It might even just be a teddy as a young kid, but those experiences were being mirrored and encouraged and allowed by the natural world. And I guess that's where, when I came to Qigong and particularly to Taoism, I just had I felt like I'd found a home and a philosophy that put into beautiful words, way beyond my skills, that experience. And within Qigong, they will say that all of my sessions will be guided by the seasons, because we have movements that are attributed to each season, and each season are connected with different organs in our bodies, and those organs are connected with different emotions. And then I guess above the season, the element as well. So there's this really lovely story of having a physical representation of what that season means in the body. And then an acknowledgement that it might be spring outside, but it might not be spring for you, and that's also okay. And so I think I've found that people like the season as a guide. It prompts questions, it gets us thinking, it creates space, and it just acknowledges the fact that we have rhythms and we can't go at a single pace all year round. We're going to burn out. And so I've loved drawing on that, sharing that. Yeah, and I've loved the idea that there are physical experiences of the natural world happening within our bodies. I think that's just such a beautiful image. Yeah.
How do I introduce that more into my life in terms of seasonal thinking?
Even if you just sat now, Olivia, and you just closed your eyes for just a moment, you just relaxed your shoulders, you relax your face, you started just to connect to your breath, and you just follow that breath as it travels into your body. Maybe you notice the temperature of the air as you breathe in. And you just allow that breath to travel a little further into your body, ideally all the way down into your belly. And then you just watch as that breath rolls back out of your body. And then in this place of stillness, you just ask yourself, what season is alive in me? Am I feeling the introspection of winter? Am I feeling the emergence of spring? Am I feeling the abundance of summer? Am I feeling grounded like late summer? Or am I feeling a period of grief and letting go like autumn? And just reflect on those and just see what came alive in your body. And gently just come back to the space. Night. I slightly that might be. Yeah, what came alive for you, Olivia?
Yeah, I really enjoy that. Thank you so much. What comes to me is I'm very synchronized with the actual seasons, and spring is really in me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it became very clear. Beautiful small practice. This is. Thank you for bringing me through it. When you were speaking also about that fifth season, the one between summer and autumn, that made so much sense to me, and I'm glad you named it, because it feels like a very specific time in my life. Whenever the summer ends and I'm going towards autumn, there is a moment that feels like a transition within me. It definitely starts to have a little bit of a morning quality, but it's not fully fall yet. And I remember as a child so distinctly being in that period And I like how you were saying that you had all of this already within you as a child, because that resonates with me as well.
Yeah. It's a really distinct period, late summer. And again, it was when it was explained within my studies, I was like, oh yeah, of course. As you say, it's just really clearly there's that dew on the ground, there's the light beginning to draw in, but there's still the warmth in the days, and like there's a feeling that you're just in that transition, and it creates a little bit of space. It's just about a 4 week window from late August until the autumn equinox. So between the more yang energy of spring and summer, there's this point in the middle of the pendulum before you move into the more yin periods of autumn and winter. And it just allows you to just gather in your life and just to reflect, because in again, back when they were developing traditional Chinese medicine, it would have been a time of kind of harvest. They would gather lots of the foods in, they would bring them into the stores, they would physically prepare themselves and their group for winter. And for us today, it's an invitation to kind of spiritually and maybe quite practically do the same. You've got to clear a bit of space in your life, because you just won't have the same amount of energy as we transition into autumn. So obviously there's that period of letting go, but it just allows you to take stock. And it's associated with the earth kind of element. So it's a really nice time to start to drop in, because again, towards the end of the summer, I know I can be definitely drawn into this like abundance, this kind of high socializing, this busy life, this really expansive. But actually, I've spent very little time in that period kind of coming down to the earth, and I need a physical reminder to do so. So I like it as a period before you get the knitwear out, before the leaves start to fall, all of those bits.
I remember finding this period of time really beautiful somehow. And also, it was often connected to me with sadness of letting go of the summer and all the connection I had during that time. Also, because I was homeschooled. So for me, summer was really a moment of connection. And then after, there would be more loneliness that I experienced. And when I was hearing you speaking earlier about your childhood, you were saying how you were in nature, but you were a little bit different from the other kids around you. Maybe you did like to wear the fancy clothes in the fields, and something that needed to be distinct somehow. And I'm wondering if there was not a loneliness there in you in being already so different from the people around you.
Yeah, when that's a really interesting observation, Olivia, and I think there was actually, and I think what's interesting is recently I went to a really amazing um, homeopath who's also a shaman, and she would plug you into a machine. This will answer the question. But she'd plug you into a bioresonance machine where they put a measure on your wrists and then one around your head, and it picks up the electrical output from your body, and it gives her a whole set of results. So combined with that information and her shamanic kind of ability to read what's alive in your eyes and what's there in your space, in the energy in your body, she can give you like really powerful insights. It was probably the most powerful hour of medical, if we're calling it that, like exploration I've had. And one of the homeopathic treatments that I required at that time developed in the time of leprosy. So it was a homeopathic treatment that they began to explore around the time of leprosy, because the people who developed leprosy were much loved by the community but had to be pushed out of the community. And so they weren't being pushed out because people didn't want them in it, but because physically they were like, we can't have you in it. And she very wisely observed that, and it was kind of quite a light bulb moment for me, that I felt maybe for all of my life, as you've correctly noted, a bit of a like person with leprosy, in terms of I wasn't one of my farming kind of folk back home, but also I've never been a London or a city dweller. And I had that experience. It was just clearly very live in my body, and it's still there now of being like, how do I navigate between these worlds? Where is my place? And I guess with the work I'm doing, I'm trying to find a bit of a blend. I'm trying to find a way of connecting with the land at home, but through new practices. You know, I brought a retreat to the farm for the first time last year, and we've never done anything like that in terms of how we bring people to the land. So I see probably a lot of my work as a desire to find that place that exists where I'm like, oh, I belong, and it's elements of both. Yeah.
The image that's coming to me is you feeling lonely in those woods and using ways to belong, such as clothes, but you're not belonging to the people around you. And you leave this place to find belonging outside. And now you're trying to bring that belonging back to where you come from, the forest. And I can see how you're doing specific gatherings when you bring people together and you're creating a community. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does resonate. Exactly that. And I think, you know, even the reason that we're naming the brand Common Nature is because of exactly that. Belonging is a really big part of it, because on a national level now, like, I'm really unnerved by the rhetoric particularly in the politics of like what it means to belong and to be English. And like I all of it is so divisive in that rhetoric, and it's really sad. And it's like, how do we actually create spaces where we realize we all belong, where we belong with all the living beings around us, we belong with one another, no matter where we're from, where our upbringing, what our belief systems are. Actually, there's common ground, and that those common, like the commons where we used to meet and converge on land, have been completely lost. You know, in the UK, I think just 8% of land is now for the public. So I guess I see my role of bringing those of people together and finding that commonality. And I used to do that a lot as a kid, and instinctively I do it socially. Like, I love bringing different groups from my life together, like my friends from university and great friends of my friends from school or home. And like, I've always enjoyed that role. And the same within the family. I'm the kind of probably go between mediator between everyone in the family. So it's a natural role, I think, for me to play. And, you know, the same with Icebreakers in London. Like, I like bringing people from different spaces and backgrounds together. So I guess the spirit of that kind of work began in that experience you described.
You named Icebreaker. I imagine many people won't know what it is. Can you tell me a few words about Icebreaker?
Yeah. Icebreakers is how Olivier and I have come to know each other through a friend, obviously, who introduced you to me, and then to the practice, or to the community of Icebreakers, really. And it is a practice and a ritual as well. And Icebreakers is a UK charity that supports men, and particularly their mental health. And it does so by cold water and rituals around cold water. I was about to say swimming in cold water, but often it's also just dipping in cold water. And they've created a really beautiful flow where we warm up for the water through our breath, through some movement. We then spend time in the water. We warm out as we come out through an Icebreakers kind of way, and then we'll spend time together as a community, and we'll check in and just check in on exactly that, on everyone. And I think as we do it once a week, and that becomes a ritual then hopefully in your life that replaces or a lot of the rituals that have been lost, particularly as we've become more agnostic. And yeah, it gives people an anchor, I think, in their life, that they know each week they can come to a place. And we really see it. We see that seasonality of being human, I think, by doing it week on week. You know, I get to know the men, and I see that life just has those ebbs and flows and those waves, and having things that just anchor you in your life, I've come to see is just so important. And so we've got a growing kind of gently growing community of men in North London who come together. There are 8 chapters now across the UK for icebreakers.
One thing that I've noticed in holding men's group and retreats with men is how much it became an anchor for me as a man and in my own process to be aligned with my masculinity. How has the process of you doing icebreaker be supporting for you in these ways?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? And I think instinctively I've found initially men's work like particularly challenging. I went to an all boys boarding school, and I think that experience like it shaped me and marked me in lots of ways, but it particularly I think created a pattern of being quite averted to like all male environments. And yeah, throughout my life I just like navigated towards the more feminine like energy, and typically that meant like gender as well. And so at first I found it challenging. It was a conscious kind of edge for me to explore, and has taken a while to get more comfortable with. I facilitate in a few other men's spaces, but on the whole, icebreakers is the only work I do in the men's workspace. And yeah, it's taught me a lot. It's taught me a lot about myself in relation to other men, about my relationship with masculinity. Like that's quite a challenging reflection at times. Yeah, and getting comfortable with like I guess demonstrating vulnerability and like having that safely within a space of men. Yeah, it's been a challenge. How have you experienced it, Olivia? Or maybe how have you experienced me facilitating within icebreakers? I'd be interested to know that.
Icebreaker is really supportive and enjoyable because it gives me that rhythm. And I do already see, I've started in October and now we're already in spring, and I've seen all the different seasons with a group of people. I was doing cold water swimming before, so I was really loving the seasonal aspects of it. But now I'm seeing the seasons of the people with who I'm doing it, and you're leading it in a way that it feels also very equal whenever you're facilitating or we're sharing. So for me, it's been a very beautiful experience to do icebreakers. When it comes to facilitating work with men, it has definitely been a big learning experience because obviously I had to go into my own understanding of masculinity and what it means for me to be a man. And I felt challenged a lot of the time, and whenever I felt challenged, it was really showing something within myself that was needing to be seen. So I'm super grateful for that. And also all these men's work, either as a participant or as a facilitator, it's been helping me making peace with masculinity because I saw it originally as something that was quite negative, because I did not, growing up, experience a lot of male presence that felt safe and anchoring and caring. And embodying that myself, I started to also see that it was existing in the world, and it's been bringing a lot of healing for myself too. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really yeah, beautiful to hear. And yeah, I think having people like you come into the group as well, Olivier, like, and each man bringing their different gifts, but you've brought like your skill and your ability to like listen really deeply and reflect, and even the way you check in terms of like truly checking in, like taking a moment and actually checking in with yourself and then reflecting. I see the impact that has on the men within the group, and it's just yeah, it's a beautiful gift that, and each man is bringing their different gifts, you know, in different ways, whether it's Jimmy coming and taking photographs, or Jack making content, or, you know, different kind of groups. And I think that's really lovely as well. And also it's a group of men who otherwise wouldn't come together socially, you know, like realistically, it's not a friendship group. And I think actually those spaces can be so rich and valuable because of that reason, because we've got something that binds us. It's the cold water, and that allows us to have men from all sorts of places to come together. And it's why it kind of fits with what I've been sharing a bit about where's that common ground between us. And for us, it's that ritual and that water. And as a result, the group's incredibly rich, in a way that maybe you don't always find in, as I say, in friendship circles or other areas of your life.
Yeah, I have the story that in our society now, we live in the city. We're far from where we come from. A lot of us come from different continents, even. And we've evolved in small tribes that knew each other all their lives. And I think one of the tragedy of today's society is we have access to so much. We can see and meet so many people, but it's so difficult to actually feel like we belong. And I'm saying we, and I'm also really speaking for myself in my journey. And I think these kind of spaces are so necessary in order to start to make that happen again. And the fact that it's a space which is free makes it also very unique, in the sense that in London you can do a lot of things, but you have to pay for it. And it's almost like, yeah, you can belong if you pay. And I think one of the things that I find very powerful about Icebreaker is that something that we can just go to, and it's a gift for everyone.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the other icebreakers are totally free, and that they go and swim in the sea. We have to spend a small fee to swim at Hampstead Heath, but relatively, it's exactly that, and that's the spirit of it. And also, that's the very reason, like, I love it. I have quite a strong resistance to places that are exclusive, particularly those that are exclusive on account of money. And so, yeah, I'm drawn to the spirit of the kind of environments that say we're for everyone. And, like, you know, maybe it's just my lens, but what I like is that I think the really cool things are, you know, I use the word cool, but like, because that's often something that I feel a lot of those other exclusive places are trying to get, but they just can't ever pick up on that little bit of essence that comes from being for everyone. And yeah, Icebreakers gets that spirit.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something very special and rich that comes from things being fully free. As I see it as the original economy, which is when we were hunter-gatherers, everything was actually free and we didn't have to pay for anything until society started to settle. It's something that I think is missing from a lot of what we experience today in our society. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I've been running it for 3 years and I haven't been paid a penny. None of the leaders across the other 8 chapters do. And as you say, that creates a kind of gift economy of, you know, that is really special, and is pretty rare. And understandably, it can't be your whole life, particularly a city like London. So having a few moments like that where you're just in service of the tribe is important. I've definitely come to realize that.
You have a project of land restoration with your father. What's the meaning of it for you?
I worked in a bakery near where I live, a friend's bakery, as I came out of lockdown, and I'd been working just as a copywriter in my boxes in my bedroom. I was just yearning human connection. I got a role in the bakery, doing some baking, doing front of house, doing occasionally some quite bad flat whites. And through that, the supplier for the flour was called Wild Farmed, and they were a regenerative farming movement. So they were working with different farmers across the UK. They were helping them bridge the transition from more traditional agriculture to regenerative practices, because often it's the transition that prevented people doing it, because you might, not return yields for a harvest or two, and most farmers couldn't afford that. So they got enough money in their system and funding to be able to bridge that transition for farmers. So they could go to farmers and say, hey, we can transition you from like input heavy kind of commercial farming, often high in pesticides, fertilizers, to a more regenerative farming structure where we're working with the land. And so I began to get interested in it, and it spoke to me. It started, this was actually back in like 2021, so a while ago now, but just started getting me curious. And I've been spending a lot of time like exploring it and going to different conferences. And in the while was starting to talk to my dad about changing practices on the farm at home. And it coincided with a time where we started to just naturally make some changes on the land. One of the big ones was that there was a commercial shoot. So, again, a very popular middle class practice of like that relationship of shooting birds, and that shut during COVID and never reopened. And that changed the whole feeling on the land. And that I talk about that because it coincided with me wanting to encourage a shift in our relationship with land. So from this extractive, hey, we farm in these ways and we bring it back to ourselves, to a more kind of unified working with the natural world. And so my dad agreed to the smallest field on the farm being a kind of test bed for us to change a system. And we've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. Again, another way in which I'm moving back towards it, and a way that feels authentic to me, that I'm like, oh, hey, these are the practices I'm interested in. And I guess on a personal level, I have a vision of maybe becoming a farmer one day, but with a slightly new angle to it. Yeah, and I think I care quite deeply about helping lead what I think is this like shift in relationship with the land, but it needs to be done in deep respect to that, my parents' generation particularly, because they were raised on farming in a certain style. It came out of a time when post Second World War, like feed the country, dig for Britain, and it led to these practices that was all lots of them knew, and they were told to do that. And now those same farmers are being vilified and being told, the ones that were celebrated are now being told, oh, you're the ones that are polluting the land. So it has to be done skillfully, I think. And also it has to be done in a way that makes sense commercially. So, yeah.
Now in your activity, you work with companies and corporations to support them and their employees with your skills. You also do workshops around Qigong, around different types of practices. Do you want to say a little bit what you offer? And therefore, if people want to find you, they can come to you. I will put all the links at the bottom here.
Yeah. Exactly that. My brand is going to be launched in the next few weeks, called Common Nature, and that will be a home for all the activities I do. It's going to involve a sauna business that we're setting up on a farm, not my farm, but another one in Hampshire. And then we run programs for different groups, for different teams on the land, and focused around natural health. So how can we be healthier together? By spending time offline on the land. So teaching tools across our body, across communication, across connecting with land, with nutrition, with sleep, lots of different things that allow us to be healthier. And then as a practitioner, predominantly I teach Qigong, and I do so across quite a few different spots in London, but I'm always open to more ideas of where to do it. And I do that one-to-one or to groups. And so, yeah, if people are curious about Qigong, they could come along to one of my workshops and hopefully we'll enjoy it.
Simon, thank you so much for sharing about your story with me and what you do. It's been really a pleasure, and I was excited to just get to know you better. I think there's so much wisdom within you, and also so much shared reality. So I'm really, really happy you could make it today. and share with me, and it just makes me excited to spend more time with you and learn more from you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Olivia. It's been a pleasure, and I know I've shared it with you before, but you hold space so well, and yeah, you listen deeply, so the conversation follows like the flow of the river, and that just feels really, yeah, really nourishing. So I love the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.